Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited for this week's episode. We are going to talk about mom guilt. I see parent guilt, but moms, we like to have more guilt than everybody else. Mom guilt a lot in my work and as a mom myself. And so I'm really excited to have a guest here who this is one of her areas of expertise to chat with me today. So Jillian, thank you so much for being here and having this
Oh my
conversation with
gosh,
me.
I am absolutely thrilled. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it was really funny because you work with Emma, and Emma was on my podcast a few months back, and I know Emma very casually from like way back when she first moved to DC. And when we did our episode together, and then all of a sudden, I was paying attention to her stuff more as you kind of tune in and out of people's stuff that you know. And I was like, oh, wait, they have a mom guilt group. That looks so cool. And like, then I was like, can I have your therapist, please? Would she talk with me? But anyway, let's start out with letting you do a little intro about the work that you do, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I am a psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been practicing for, oh gosh, about almost 10 years now. I specialize in perinatal work over the last few years. So working with, let's say, like parents, new parents, aspiring parents, so people who are going through perhaps, a long fertility process, loss, trauma, things like that. And really love also just kind of focusing in on the transition to parenthood, what that looks like, what that means. I don't
Mhm.
think we do a very good job letting parents know what it looks like what it really means to become a parent, how it changes your identity, how it
Yes.
changes things about you, and so I love everything around that work, and that's also where the mom guilt group and everything grew out of.
I love that. It's a time that needs so much more support and understanding and expectation setting and like structural support. And we do such a bad job of it in this country all around.
100%. Totally agree.
So let's start with like what feels very basic, but maybe is a good place to just get everyone on the same page. How do you define mom guilt? Like, how would you explain that to somebody who doesn't have a clear definition of like the nuance of it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think people have an understanding of like what guilt is, right? Of just that, that's just feeling bad about something, right? Guilt is
Hmm.
just feeling bad about something that you have done or that you have not done, right? About a behavior, even a thought or something like that.
Hmm.
But when we say mom guilt, what we're talking about really is the the sense that you are you are failing as a parent because of something that you're doing or not doing, and specifically failing as a mom because of something
Hmm.
you're doing or not doing. And it typically has to do with some sort of expectation that someone other than you has set for you, right? I feel guilty because I don't have my kid on a particular schedule and I feel like I should. I feel guilty
Hmm.
because I got mad at my kid or I yelled at my kid, and good parents never yell, right? Stuff like that. Like really this sense that like I'm doing this thing, this specific behavior that makes me a bad parent, a bad mom.
Hmm. Hmm. I see a lot with the rules and the shoulds around
Mm-hmm. Oh
sleep
my gosh.
and around parenting. A lot, right? I should or shouldn't do this, or it's my fault that my baby or my toddler or my child is acting a certain way because of what I should or shouldn't have done. A
Oh
lot.
my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I had, in my group the other day, actually, somebody said something along the lines of like, I feel so guilty that my baby's not on a set schedule. Their baby was transitioning to daycare, like 4 months old. And they had asked like, what do his naps look like? What do his, feedings look like? Things like that. And she was like, I just kind of feed on demand. I put him down when he's sleepy. Like I felt so guilty that he wasn't on a schedule. They expected me to have him on a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And yet at four
absolutely.
months, most babies aren't really on much of a schedule. So it's so
I know
funny.
mine weren't.
It's so funny how I see, and I'm sure you see this as well, though maybe in different areas. Like I see so many of the things that make moms feel guilty are actually very unrealistic expectations. And like that example right there was like actually what the mom was doing exactly what she should be doing, right? Attuning to her baby, following her baby's lead. It was working for her, presumably more or less, and then you get this outside expectation that's like, you should be able to, I don't know, whatever. And it's like what the parent was doing all along was what was right for them.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Like the rules. There's so many, it feels like
Mhm.
there are so many rules to being a parent. And even even though like oftentimes they contradict each other, they don't make sense, they don't
Yes.
work, like parenting and none of it's all no baby is one size fits all, right? Like and so often though, it's like, yeah, whatever voice is the loudest in the conversation really makes people feel incredibly bad, incredibly guilty, like they're doing their child a disservice, like they are somehow
Yes.
doing harm or potential harm to their child by not following a very specific set of like rules. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I unfortunately sometimes call pediatricians out a lot, but like I feel like part of this is because we get some of those messages from very like places that hold a lot of cultural authority, like the pediatrician. Like I have literally had clients come back to me from their pediatricians. And I love pediatricians to say this all the time when I bash on them. Like mine are great. I've had great pediatricians for my kids for the most part. There are wonderful ones out there. But um I've had clients come back to me and be like, my pediatrician literally told me I was ruining my child's future ability to self-regulate if I don't do cried out. And I'm like,
Oh my God.
WTAF. Like, let's talk about the neuroscience of that, but also like, oh my God, who would say that? Like it's wrong. And there's all sorts of science why that's wrong, but also like, how is that a helpful thing to say, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, right? Like, it is wrong, but like, I'm like, that's so terrible on so many levels.
Right,
To have a
right.
parent leaving your like, what, 15 minutes you have with your pediatrician with that kind of message in their ear, like, that's
Mhm.
just I've heard it a lot too. So it was very explicit in that conversation that stands out to me, but it's not a one-off. It's just like it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, it really is, and it's also hard because I feel like anybody can be an authority these days, if that makes sense, right? Because like a
Yes.
pediatrician holds a lot of cultural authority, like you were saying, right? And people of that ilk, and also because we have so much, social media and everything like that,
Hmm.
like there are so many voices in the conversation. So people who are both educated and not educated about
Yes.
things like out there really selling themselves as experts and giving bad advice,
Yes.
or making parents feel really bad in the process. And
Yes.
so it's often not even good advice.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The amount of inaccurate, right? There's advice that like doesn't
Mm-hmm,
resonate or
mm-hmm,
resonates with your kids or you feel good about or matches your values or doesn't. Like, and that's one conversation. But then there's just like blatantly like wrong. And it's like it's
yeah.
not arguable. That's not how the body works, right? Like there's no discussion here, like it's just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much of that that makes people kind of really undermines confidence. Um
Yes. Yeah, it really does.
So I think there's a lot of areas we could dig into here, but I want to piece out a little bit because this is something that I see play out just in like casual observations of like parent discussions a lot. And it's this like I feel guilty versus for something
Mm-hmm.
versus I feel like someone is shaming me for something or feel ashamed of
Mm-hmm.
something versus like I regret how this played out just due to
Yeah.
circumstances. And I feel like,
Yeah.
transition to parenthood is such a time of vulnerability. And there's like so much out of our control about birth, about feeding journeys, and about sleep, and about, what our child's temperament is, and our own mental health journeys. And like, there are things we can control in there, but there's so much that we can't control, like even with the best
Mhm.
support. I don't know. I'd love to kind of talk those out a little bit.
Yeah, the kind of guilt versus shame versus the regret pieces.
Yeah, like there are things like, okay, so I am like we don't need to go into ton of detail, but like my oldest, he turned breech at the last minute. We planned out of a hospital birth. It was a C-section. Like for a long time, I felt very guilty and ashamed of it. Now I'm just like, it was what it was. Like I regret that that is how it had to play out. But like, I'm
Hmm.
also kind of at peace with it. Like it is what it is. He's
Hmm.
11 now. He's almost 12. So it's like, it's a long time ago. Doesn't really like, it's not raw for me. It was for me, in the early years of parenting, but like there's a lot of judgments around, how you give birth,
Hmm.
how you feed your baby, what you do around sleep. And there's like, I feel guilty because of this. And then I feel like people are making me feel shame because this. And there's like, I just kind of
Hmm.
regret that that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want that to go that way, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel
Yeah,
like, no, I
yeah.
wasn't very coherent, but do you know where I'm going with that?
No, I love no, yes, no, no, no. I love it. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I wanted to make sure I heard you right before I jumped in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right, like we all, I mean, we all experience all three of those things, right? We all experience
Mm-hmm.
regret, we all experience guilt, we all experience shame, right? And they're kind of like three layers of this of a similar like experience or emotion, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
regret. Like I regret that it went that way. I regret that I made that decision or didn't make that decision. I regret that that's how it had to be. Is so normal. We do things I mean, we probably won't do things we regret every day, but like we do parenting things we regret sometimes, big and small. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's, I regret that I didn't set better screen time limits and now my child is a monster with the iPad, or like, I regret that I yelled at my kid or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And guilt and shame are like, they're like, shame is like guilt's big older sibling, right? Like guilt is just the feeling of like, I've done something wrong, I've done something bad. And then shame on top of that is like, I've done something bad because I am bad, right? Like I'm a bad
Mm.
person because I did XYZ. I'm a bad person. So like I wound up having a C-section, unplanned C-section with my first child, right? Like, and I remember then not that long after that, I saw an article online that was like, the golden hour is so important, and here's why you have
Yes.
to have the golden hour with your child. And I didn't get that. She had to go to the NICU. Both my children had to go to the NICU. I did not get, skin to skin time with either of them after they were born, whatever. They're 8 and 3 now. I feel fine about it. I feel very resolved about it. Like there are things sure that I wish had gone differently, but I don't feel guilty about it. I don't feel like I did something wrong. I don't feel
Mm-hmm.
ashamed of what happened. But like, yes, we as a society are so prescriptive about what parents are supposed to do and how things are supposed to go, that like it inspires a lot of guilt, and then guilt spirals into shame when it makes us feel like we're bad people, we've done something wrong. Like shame is also a very like it's an emotion that's promoted by like hiding, by not
Mm.
shining a light on it, right? So often, you have these people sitting with all this shame, all these feelings about a parenting decision that they have made, but they struggle to talk about it. They struggle to even admit to feeling bad about it because they feel so ashamed. Like they feel like other people are going to judge them so harshly for a decision, and that and I know I'm not talking about like harm, like objectively harmful things like, what, physically abusing your child or something like that.
Yep.
I'm talking about like just run of the mill everyday type of parenting decisions, feeding decisions, sleeping decisions, things like
Yeah.
that.
I see a lot of parents in my practice. I openly and happily support bed sharing families, but I have a lot of families who like secretly bed share, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
of that fear of external judgment. And sometimes they come in feeling like they're doing something wrong, right? And then we kind of go through the education and the safety and like kind of dig into a little more. And sometimes it still stays like low key because I don't want to hear other people's opinions, but it sort of can shift from like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, so I have to hide it, to I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually doing something that works for my family. I'm doing it safely, but I don't really need to hear other people's thoughts on it. And that kind of shift, which can be,
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's a really powerful shift, right?
yeah.
And especially with something like bed sharing, like you were talking about, which if people are educated about, like there are ways to do it much more safely. But if somebody's so afraid that they're going to get judged or shamed for talking about it, for mentioning that it happens or that it happened, um, they're going to be they're likely to be a lot less safe about it.
Exactly, which is
Yeah.
why places like the UK that have a risk reduction and do education on safe bed sharing are much smarter than places like the US where we're like abstinence only, no one should ever bed share. And it's like, sorry, like biologically normal, gonna happen. Like
Yes,
we're not
yes,
helping
and
it
gonna
happen
happen.
safely if we don't talk about it.
No, no, because then you're gonna fall asleep somewhere unsafe. Then you're gonna right
Uh-huh,
like things like that. So
exactly.
um yeah, exactly. I think we're very caught up in kind of a very much like perfect, kind of air quotes perfect parenting,
Yes.
and what that looks like. And it's just, I mean, there's no there's just no such thing.
Yeah. You know, something I also find really interesting is the ways in which sharing research that isn't meant to be even prescriptive or like judgmental, the way like so many of these topics have become so like divisive, so like
Mm.
people they do get judged so often that even sometimes sharing research can make you feel like you're getting judged. Like I remember kind of back to we'll take it away from sleep back to like C-section with my oldest. The research started coming out about like the microbiome during a vaginal birth versus the C-section. And like how many people I saw who in my like sort of birth trauma groups were like, this, it was so triggering and it made them feel so guilty. Even though it was like, it was a research paper. It wasn't even like everybody should make sure their baby's exposed to their like the flora from their, a vaginal birth or anything like that. And it's like, I feel like you hear information in the context of being judged so much that it almost charges things that are more about educating than about a commentary on anyone's
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really good way to put it, right? That we get this information and we're so focused on like viewing it through the lens of our own experience, particularly if it was like a bad experience or that it somehow it feels like it's not in line with whatever this was. So like, right, you didn't have a vaginal birth, your baby wasn't exposed to all the microbiome, coming out of the birth canal, like,
Mhm.
and therefore what? Like,
You failed them forever. I mean, that's
right,
what I remember, like doom
right,
spiraling, like,
right.
with a 1-year-old and being like that, logically being like, that's stupid. Like, I didn't, but also like, people do it.
But that, oh, they absolutely do. And in some ways, like in some ways, I think people kind of trying to think about like kind of how to put this, but like I think in some ways too, like research can be weaponized in a way that like,
Mm-hmm.
and I please, please, please hear me when I say like I am huge. I'm a doctor. I'm a big fan of research. I love research. And when you take like a snippet, right, when you make research
Yes.
into this sound bite that that gets played on the evening news or whatever, right? Like people lose the we lose perspective. You lose the ability to like understand like what is this really saying, right? There's a really big difference too between something being like ideal, right? There's lots of things in the world that are
Mm-hmm.
ideal. Like life doesn't always go the ideal way, but like there's a lot of difference between like ideal and good enough. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
big fan of like doing things good enough or like doing what you
Yes.
can, controlling what you can, right? Like, yes, it would have been ideal if like my second kid had not been born at 36 weeks and hadn't had to be in the NICU for a week. So her lungs could develop, but like I don't have any control over that. I can't go back and do anything differently about that. And like she's absolutely fine, right? But like I can't. I'm not gonna feel guilty because there's research out there that shows that like babies, ideally should be born as close to 40 weeks as possible, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing I can do about that. I have to play the hand that I'm dealt. But I think for a lot of folks, it's easy. And like I recognize I have a lot of confidence in saying that, and I think part of that's just doing the work that I do and having parented for a long time. Because I think for a lot of folks, that kind of thing is like, oh my God, how have I ruined my child? When they
Yes.
hear something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see this a lot. I talk a lot about the research around sleep training, right? Always
Mm-hmm,
with the caveat,
mm-hmm,
we're talking about the structures, and we're talking about the research. We're not talking ever talking about individual parents' decisions when I'm doing this. But I do think it's really important to understand like how poor quality the research is around sleep training, all the things that we don't know, because, sort of the mainstream narrative is like sleep training is safe and effective, and we know this without a doubt. And it's like, well, actually, we don't. Like, the research does not what it says. It doesn't say that it's harmful, but it's like, it's just not that high quality. And there's lots
mm-hmm,
of stuff that hasn't been researched. And so you start talking about sleep training research, and that gets like, people who aren't, my ideal client loves it, but my ideal client doesn't want to sleep train. So your average parent hears that. And so many of them, it just kind of gets that defensive, I'm being judged, when it's like,
mm-hmm,
I don't care what you do with your baby. Like, that's your job. I mean, obviously, as long as everyone's safe and healthy, like that's your decisions.
mm-hmm,
But as a society, we shouldn't pretend that we have high quality research where we don't.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and like that sleep training came out of the well-being of babies and parents, because it didn't. And so that's one of those where you start talking about the research and kind of all the holes in it and how poor quality it is and what it doesn't show. And people get kind of like uncomfortable. And I feel like it
Mm-hmm,
brings up a
mm-hmm,
lot of feelings of guilt if they were sort of pushed into feeling like they didn't have other options. And that's where it gets really tricky, right? When we have all these external expectations kind of corner you into feeling like this is the only option I have.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then you get guilt.
Right. Yes, yes. I think so much of it has to do with you mentioned earlier like what we how we treat, moms and babies and parents and babies as a society, right? Like so much of it is so systemic, right? That like um, you know, a lot of babies don't sleep through the night for a long time. A lot of people don't sleep through the night for a long time. And but like you are made to feel as though you are feeling or bad as a parent if your baby is not sleeping through the night by a certain point. If you're, and it's all doing my little like anti-capitalist rant here, but like it's all about like feeding a system that does not want us to rest, that doesn't want us to like, you're not productive if you're not getting enough sleep. You're not
Uh-huh.
contributing to society enough if you're not getting enough sleep, mom. Like it's
I
so
I
oof.
mean, I often talk about like capitalism as part of that cultural force that brought us sleep training, right? Late
Mhm. I'm sure.
1800s, industrial revolution, efficiency, get back to your factory work, like put that baby on a schedule. They don't need you. Like all this kind of stuff was part of how those beliefs formed long before we knew anything about attachment or development or brain science, like neuroscience or brain development or any of that. Um,
Mhm.
and then we kind of get here where I see a lot of guilt around eating to sleep, right? Holding babies, things that are biologically normative for humans, like we're carry mammals, we're supposed to hold our babies. That doesn't mean that you should hold your baby all the time and feel like you can never put them down, but like it's normal for a baby to be held when they're sleeping. Like that is normal for humans. And of course,
Mhm.
we all have to find the right balance, right? Like that's some babies get put down really easily, and that's great. Some babies cannot sleep like put down. They absolutely can't self-regulate, and that's a different experience for those parents. But there's so much guilt around things that I'm like, these things are really biologically normal for us as
Right.
humans.
Yeah.
And it's really just Western cultures that say that they're not normal,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
but
I
so
feel
much guilt, like, I
guilty.
feel defeated sleep. It's my fault that my baby's waking, or my fault because I'm holding them for their naps, or like whatever. There's
Mhm.
so much of that.
Right. Or I feel guilty because I didn't do anything today except for like sit on the couch and snuggle the baby and feed the baby and yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
what you're supposed to be. People who were like, a month postpartum, 2 months postpartum, and it's like I didn't clean the house, I didn't do the dishes. Like I'm not like living up to some standard, right? And like you were saying, like
Mm-hmm.
helping people find a balance that's right for them and their family, right? Because yeah, I mean not getting a break, feeling touched out, feeling
That's legit.
um overwhelmed. Yeah, totally legitimate, and needing support in the postpartum period, right? Like, and just as a human, as a parent, right? But like, there's also just this sense of, and whenever I hear anybody talk about being productive on their maternity leave, I just like my like alarm bells start going off. I'm like, no, don't do
Yes, I know. Oh,
that.
yes. Yes.
But
And it's like,
also out of care for themselves, right? Not just about like I don't think people are screwing up their babies by putting them down, right? But that or by trying to help them figure out how to regulate and things like that. But that like they're also doing a disservice to themselves because there's this sense of like, oh my gosh, I can, I can't do the things that I'm supposed to do according to some book somewhere or some
mhm.
person on TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that feeds in with this, like, I think a lot of mom guilt that I see comes from this idea that we're supposed to be able to do it all,
Mm-hmm.
and do it all well. And like, we forget that parenting a nuclear family is a pretty modern Western concept.
Yeah.
And most of human history, there were a lot more adult arms to hold the baby. So it didn't matter if the baby can ever be put down because there were always a lot of adults around. So it wasn't one or two parents, you know, feeling touched
Yeah.
out because there were all these aunties and grandmas and cousins and extended, support. So like the baby
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to get put down, but that didn't mean the parent was the one holding the baby all the time either. And so obviously we don't really have that anymore. But that feeling like I should be able to do all of it. And I don't know about you, but I have seen a trend in my parents that I work with where ever since the pandemic, more and more of them who work from home are trying to work from home without childcare and
I
then
do
wondering
not.
why they
Oh
can't
my God.
manage anything. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like a crisis thing. Do not do this to yourself. Like, you cannot be a good
Right.
employee and a good parent, like, without a good chunk of childcare. Like,
Yeah.
it's not meant to be
Yeah.
like that. Don't, like, it's hard because you're not supposed to be able to do this all at once without support. So, like,
Mm.
oh,
Yes, I say that to people all the time, right? It's like, no, we were not meant to raise babies. Like we were meant to raise babies in community, right? Like we were
yes.
meant to be in community and to be with one another. And I think COVID has done a number on parents. It definitely has, right? Because yeah, there at the beginning, my oldest was 3 at the beginning of COVID. I had a baby
Yes.
during not like the height of it, but in May of 2021, I had my second child, and um, so many of the parents that I'm seeing these days, I'm not seeing too many clinically who are trying to work without childcare, which is good because I think that that's a recipe for disaster for everybody. But more like people who are very isolated and have not found their kind of parenting community because it was already really fractured, I think, before COVID, and now
Mm,
like you weren't even meeting parents at daycare pickup and drop off. You weren't
yeah.
going to circle time and story time at the library and things like that, and like people either fell out of the habit, didn't get into the habit, never really got to establish some of those things. And I think it's been really, really harmful for parents. I think it's done a big number on people's mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard. Like, you're supposed to have the parent spaces to help kind of reality check you and balance you out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and have that space where everyone's kind of in the same struggle zone, right? Like, it's so important. Sometimes, it can cause some comparison stuff, but like it's such an important place to have that community to have.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the big reasons that I created this group that I've done. I actually just wrapped up my first one today, my first like
Oh,
set of groups.
yay.
We had 5 members, and it was really fantastic. It was wonderful because and the feedback that I got from them And this didn't surprise me at all. They're all parents of kids like 5 and under. Some had like infants and all the way up to like, yeah, 5-ish. And the feedback that I got was like, I never get to have these conversations with people. Or like, it's so refreshing to hear other people feel the same way. Or like, yes, I struggle with that too, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
people need to hear, like need to be in the struggle together. I think that's another big part of the lack of community, because it's not even just not having people, in your corner to help with practical, logistical, emotional support, but even just people who are going through the same difficult stuff as you, who you can both
Mm-hmm.
learn from and commiserate with and feel supported by and have compassion for. And then in turn, hopefully some of that compassion can come back to you when you realize like nobody's a perfect parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My husband and I joke a lot about like, so my kids are pretty intense kiddos, and we like to joke about certain neighbors. We're like, they're never allowed to move because they also have intense kiddos. And so like it's so gratifying when like I'm struggling out in the morning to get my 6-year-old to school. Once we're out of the house, it's always good. It's getting out of the house, right? Like one more thing in the shoes and I mean, it, like my kids defy all of the like normal tips. And I'm like, you guys are never allowed to move because one morning I'm coming out of the house feeling like a hot mess, and you're cool and collected and you're cheering me on. And the next morning you're coming out of the house looking like a hot mess. And I'm like, and so like, oh, we need it. We
Yes,
need to all like alternate who's being a mess so that we can
right.
feel like we're not the only one being a mess. It's like it's so good.
It's so
I love
true.
it.
It's so true.
I love it. I want to kind of think about or shift the conversation a little bit to when moms are feeling guilt. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like we all do sometimes. Thoughts on like a few things they can do to sort of tackle that or push back against that with themselves or, with what's around them, what they're surrounding themselves with.
Yes.
What can we do besides kind of just being aware of it?
Yeah, yeah. And right, the awareness I think is the first piece, and the awareness of the unrealistic expectations, right, that we're placing on
Yes.
ourselves, right? But then where do you go from there, right? Like, what do you do then with that information? One of the things that I have found incredibly valuable in my work with moms is values based work, right? So coming out of kind of like acceptance and commitment therapy realm of identifying like what is the most important to you, what's at the top of your list, because everything can't be important. That's not possible, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
not everything can be your number one priority. And so helping people to think about what their values are, what's actually important to them. And there's lots of ways you can do this. There's if you were to even Google something like values card sort or something like that, or Russ Harris is like the big ACT guy. He wrote a book called The Happiness Trap, and and like a values card sort, and you literally go through like a list of values and have to like pull out the ones that are the most important to you. And it can be a hard process, right? You're given this list of all these things that might seem
Mm-hmm.
like good or virtuous, but it really makes you think about, okay, if this aspect of my life or my identity or whatever is this important to me, and I'm not seeing to it at all, I'm not tending to it at all, right? Like, what does that mean for me? Or if this aspect is really important, but I'm focusing my attention way more on something that's actually not important to me, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's an issue. So, like a parenting example, right? Like the focus on independent sleep, for example,
That's what I was
right?
about
That
to
like,
say.
yeah, I mean, it's like it's viewed as like this bad. So like for me, for example, like I between like 1 and 2, my kid still wasn't sleeping very well, and I would bring her in our bed sometimes, but it didn't work well for me because it kept me awake. So like it wasn't a
Mm.
good solution for me oftentimes, but that doesn't mean it's not a good solution for some people, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't work for some families, but there's all this like, oh, never allow your kid in your bed. We don't even allow our kid in our bedroom. Like, I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, I
Like,
don't know. What world do you live in? Okay.
I'm like, okay, like you like where do you keep the lock and the key, right? But like, but like if people want to sleep, like if it's important to you for some reason, if there's some reason why you want your child to sleep independently and focusing on that, like, great. That's like, do what works for your family, for your kid, for your lifestyle, whatever. But don't do it because, the perfect parent on the internet told you to, or because your
Yes.
pediatrician told you to. Like, don't do it because somebody else told you that it was the like air quotes right thing to do.
I say that a lot when parents come to me and they're really tired, but they also want goals that take effort
Yes.
or that with their child's temperament are not actually going to get them more sleep. And so I'll be like, what's the priority here? Right. So, like with most families that I work with, because I work with a lot of higher sensitivity, higher
Mm-hmm.
persistent, higher alert babies. And these babies are the ones that tend to struggle with independent sleep more than average.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, we work on it if they want to, but like a lot of times, independent sleep and getting more sleep are at odds with each other for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of families. Not all families, because not all families, you know, obviously every family is different, right? But for a lot of families, those two things can be at odds. And so it's like, if the answer is we need to get you more sleep, then we need to look at the tools that actually get your family more sleep and not be so narrow in the definition of what sleep should look like, right? If the answer is not necessarily that maximizing sleep is a top priority, but like getting the kiddo out of your bed because they're kicking you all night long is a top priority. And that's like
Right.
sensory overload. Um, or we need to stop nursing to sleep because you're having really bad nursing aversion, even if it's harder to get them to sleep in another way initially, right? Like, then that's the priority. And so we can't, like, it's kind of like what you're saying, we can't have all the priorities at once. Sometimes we know, like, what are we really
Mm-hmm.
trying to achieve here? And is this
Right.
goal going to achieve it? Is,
Yeah, and those things get lost in the shuffle. I think so often in early parenthood, in particular, is like you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, you're this
mhm,
massive transition, and like everybody's telling you you have to do A, B, C through Z things to like keep your baby alive and happy and healthy and cognitively on the right path and stimulated and da 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 da.
mhm,
And it's just like, oh my gosh, like the list becomes so 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 long. It's like I cannot possibly
yeah,
do all of those things. Where do I want to focus my energy and my attention?
yeah, I love that. The values and like where are we bringing that energy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I use that too in terms of how are people nurturing the other parts of their identity as they transition to being a parent, right? Like I think
Mhm.
there's a really big move towards a very intensive style of parenting these days that where it's like you're with your kids all the time and you're like doing things all the time and you're like constantly like doing enrichment activities and like thinking about all of the things and it's like, okay, but like you are still, this is a massive identity shift that we don't recognize as a society in that way. But also, like, you are
Mhm.
still, in some ways, the person that you were before you had this baby. Like, what else? What do you have that you need? Like, what do you need? What needs tending to for you? What needs
Yeah.
care for you? This is a big conversation of being this hasn't even come up at all here today, but like, I work with most of the people that I work with are working moms, or they work outside of the home. A lot of times, it's very demanding jobs, and they feel a lot of tension between their career and their parenting, not even just because it's really hard to have a career and parent at the same time, and it's just hard to be a parent, right? But that they feel guilt or they feel bad because like they're working outside of the home and
Mm,
some voice somebody is suggesting that they shouldn't be, right? There's some judgment out there, or something like that, and it's also like, or they feel guilty because they're excited to go back to work or they're looking forward to going back to work or something like that. It's like, it's okay that you're still like a human being. Like you became a parent. And yeah, I know that's super important to you, but also like other things are still allowed to be important to you.
mhm.
You're still allowed to have other parts of your life. And they may look different now that you had a baby, and that's okay too. But like this doesn't have to be your only thing in your whole life
Yeah.
now.
I find that people feel guilty on both sides of that. Like guilty to go back to work, but also guilty if they had a lot of work ambition and it's not their top priority anymore,
Yes. Oh my
right?
gosh, yes, absolutely.
That
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
me, right? Guilty, if you want time away from your baby, but also guilty if you actually don't, but other people making you feel like you should. it's like there's just so much of that prescriptive, this is what you should
Hmm.
be doing instead of like actually what feels good to you in this phase and you're not locking yourself into this forever. This is just you with an infant versus you with a toddler versus you with a preschooler, and that stuff changes over time. Those
Yeah.
balancing of values and pieces of your identity.
Yes. I often talk about how I'm like embracing mediocrity in this phase of my life. And I mean it, I'm joking
I
a
love
little
that.
bit when I say it, but like what I mean by that is like, no, I'm not, I'm done having kids. I'm out of the newborn, early little baby phase. I finally feel, kind of back to myself in a lot of ways. And and I'm not, I have people say to me things about their own work, like, oh my God, like I'm not interested in a promotion right now. I'm not interested in growing my career right now. I'm happy where I am. I'm fine where I am. And like I feel the same way. I mean, like I'm working, I work in private practice, like I'm doing my thing. I feel good about it, but like I'm not I'm not trying to grow my professional self as much as I possibly could right now at this point in my life. And I don't feel badly about it, but I think especially for women, we're kind of like damned if we do and damned if we don't.
Yes.
Like you don't like if you decide that when you have kids, if you decide you want to change your path, like you're betraying the cause of feminism, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Oh, I
you
got
were,
that. Yes.
oh yes, you're betraying the cause, you're a traitor to the cause,
Yes.
um because you're not working as hard as you possibly could on getting on career growth or whatever, right? Or the flip side of that coin, which is like, well, you're not being a good enough mom because you're still on the
Mm-hmm.
partnership track, or you're not being a good enough mom because you're still going after that career thing. You still feel very ambitious when really like there are so many ways to be a good enough parent, right? There are
Yes.
so many ways to be a good enough parent. And I think one of the ways in which we are a good enough parent is that we show up for ourselves and we're authentic to what's important to us, and that we recognize that those things can change and shift with
Yes.
time, and we figure out how to listen to ourselves and drown out some of that like noise, because that's exactly what it is. It's just noise, so much of it.
I feel like that, like, in some ways is like the perfect antidote, right? Be aware when you're feeling guilty about something, get accurate information and then drown out the noise. Like I tell parents all the time to like unfollow sleep
Yes.
accounts. I'm like,
Yes.
if this account does not make you feel like you're doing a great job as a parent, you should not be following them. Like,
Hmm.
absolutely unfollow, like unfollow, unfollow, unfollow. If it does not resonate, if you've already picked your values, right? Like if you're one of my clients, you probably already picked your values. You're going to be a more responsive, you're looking for responsive attachment based, like sleep stuff. That's what I do. So if that's the path you're going, why like don't follow sleep training accounts that are just going to send you in an anxiety spiral because it's not helpful. Follow other responsive voices if you want to hear like different people's way of talking about things, because that's always good. But like only follow people who make you feel like you're doing a good job and line up with your values once you've clarified them. Because otherwise, it's just like, it just makes you feel guilty and it just takes up so much mental space. It's
Hmm.
exhausting.
Hmm. Absolutely. That was the conversation the first week of the group. It was like, who are you listening to? Who are you following? Like what voices are in this conversation for you? And
Yes.
like which one should be, which one shouldn't? Like take a look at your social media. Exactly. Like what makes you feel bad when you look at it? What do you look at and you just think like, oh, this is not like, oh, I'm not like that, or my life's not like that. Like what am I doing wrong? Right? Like, no,
Mhm.
we don't need any of that.
Or
Hmm.
this just makes me feel bad or makes me doubt my decisions or makes me feel like I'm like not good enough. Like no one needs to feel that way as a parent. And like why like, these are dumb people on the internet. Like who are they that you
Right.
don't owe them your follow.
Yes.
You don't owe them your attention, your space, your emotional, like anything. So it's like such an easy self-care thing, like to
It
just
is.
unfollow people.
It is. Although it's, I think for some people though, it's almost like even the act of doing that, like as it produces some sense of guilt, because it's like, oh, well, if I'm not, am I ruling out an expert? Am I not listening to someone who I'm quote unquote supposed to be listening to? Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
there's nobody out there that you you have to listen to you. If you're co-parenting, like you need to work with your co-parent, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's just, yeah, but like finding exactly the people that are going to help you be the parent that you want to be in and grow in the way that you want to grow as a parent. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And especially I feel like I mean, I guess parenting is full of conflicting information, but I feel like in the baby space, sleep is probably the most conflicting,
Mm,
but it's also the most inaccurate. And so I think that's the thing that where a lot of parents feel guilty is they often feel guilty over inaccurate information. And it's like one of my huge pet peeves is like, aside from the parents who work with me, because they come to me for my approach, right? And I don't have to
yeah,
work across approaches because nobody has to do that. But like, if everyone can just have the like what's normal, then that's going to inform those decisions so much differently. People are still going to make really different decisions because of what you were saying about values and like how and who their baby is and who they are and all that kind of stuff. But like, I just see so much fear-based, inaccurate
yeah,
information making parents feel guilty instead of it being more along the lines of like, what is your values and what do you think your baby can handle and what can you handle? Versus
yeah,
like feeling like I am a bad parent for nursing my baby to sleep is very
yeah,
different than like I know it's normal to nurse my baby to sleep, but it doesn't really work for me, so I'm going to try not to do it. Like those are two really different
mm,
decisions. Like I'm making an active choice not to knowing that it's okay to do it versus like I feel guilty and feel like my baby's sleep is terrible because I shouldn't be nursing them to sleep, you know?
right, right, yes. Oh, absolutely. I remember very clearly from, and this is what, like almost 9 years ago now. Uh, I took a like a pre-baby class, at the hospital where my daughter was born, and one of the like kind of sections that they talked about was feeding, and they're very big on breastfeeding and you kind of baby, what do they call it, like baby first or um whatever. And I was planning to breastfeed, and I did, and I breastfed both my kids, and I loved it. And it worked really well for us and our family. And I remember I was like a little baby psychologist at the time. I had just finished my doctorate, and I saw on like the little informational sheet, that was one thing that was like, nursing, babies who nurse have a higher IQ than babies who are formula fed. And there was like a little like footnote. It was like, it said something about the IQ being like 4 points different. I'm like, do you know, like 4 points on an IQ test means nothing, right? Like,
I mean,
as being a
IQ
little
tests are kind
psychologist to
of
me, like, well, exactly. There's, aside from all of the like, right, like aside from all of the problematic things about IQ tests in and of themselves, right? But like, even at the time, I was like, that's like almost within the like the margin of error, right? That like you could do, especially when you're doing like research on massive numbers of people. And once again, I'm not saying that research isn't important, right? But if you say a thing that's like, on the news, that's like, oh, breastfed babies are smarter than formula fed babies, and it's like, oh, that's like such a loaded statement. When really, like, what it boils down to is this test with this research with a whole bunch of people
at
showed this
population
very, very
level.
minuscule difference.
Yeah.
Exactly. But like, but once again, it just made me think of that kind of like you said, the inaccurate information piece of like people don't understand like what that actually means, or they're not given accurate information about, or you're talking at a population level, when like statistics like that don't mean very much at the level of the individual,
Yeah, I
which
was gonna say,
really can be very problematic.
that's what jumps out to me that like as someone with a public health background who is more qualitative but like knows enough about statistics and like that population versus individual level. Um that if you've ever had to think that way and look at research that way, it's not really on your radar. And so even things like it's not even necessarily inaccurate, it's lacking context.
Yes, yeah,
And
I think
it's
that's a
on
good
a
way to put
very
it.
charged topic. So like there are
Mm,
a lot of things that are true about human milk being, meant, having health benefits or being sort of the species specific thing versus formula. And on an individual level, that's not necessarily going to say what your kids' outcomes are going to be. And
mhm,
it's a really charged topic, so we have to use really sensitive language because some of that is a choice and a lot of that is out of your control, you know?
mhm, mhm.
And so it's a tricky because I feel like that's a really actually be even better than sleep. Good example of like so much of that stuff can make you feel really guilty, even when it's actually factually true,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much that's out of your control and you're in a society that isn't structurally supporting, you know, the whole lactation journey is
Yes,
poorly supported. And so it's like, oh, it's so complicated and so nuanced and also so emotive because it is so important to so many people. And then you don't get the support you need. And it's just,
right.
oh,
Yeah. I mean, it for
so many
me, I mean,
layers.
oh my God, so many layers. I had an experience like that when my first was born. I was starting my postdoc. It was like an hour and a half commute each way every day.
Ooh.
I was pumping in the car. I was pumping all the time. I was pumping after she went to bed. I like really put so much pressure on myself to um, feed her exclusively breast milk. And it almost made me lose my mind. And and it was because of this sense of like that is what is better regardless of what is good for me, regardless of what is right. And like I regret I regret that I did that because it
Mhm.
would have been easier if I had done combo feeding, if I had like allowed myself to open my mind up to like, no, I could be taken care of better in this scenario too. And like there are systemic factors at play that are making this really difficult. And it doesn't make me like a bad person or a bad mom if I want to
Mhm.
change this, even if I'm not able to do it in a way that like feels ideal to
Mhm.
me. And then I really backed myself into a corner because she got to an age where like she wasn't interested in formula and we didn't have the kind of bandwidth to try out a whole bunch of different formulas and things like that. And like we made it work. She's still alive. She's 8. She's doing great now.
Yeah.
But like it was incredibly, incredibly stressful. And I had a lot of voices in my ear that I didn't need just being like, nope, nope, you should just breastfeed that baby. It's fine.
So interesting because I feel like in situations like that, just to sidetrack us slightly, it's like it really needs to come from you because for somebody else, right? Particularly like I've had this conversation with a number of parents who like birth was traumatic, right? And nursing was something going well.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're in a situation where like people are telling them to stop.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like it can go both ways. Like sometimes it's like give yourself some grace. Like there's a lot
Absolutely.
going on here, and maybe taking that pressure off yourself is the right thing. And then there's the flip side of like actually though being told that like you could just give formula can actually create a lot of mental health struggles also. And so it's like it has to come kind of back to the mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
so much that nursing parent has to be the one that drives
Yeah.
that because externally it can be really hard to know which is the right thing to say. Is this somebody who needs encouragement to like it's okay to give a little bit of formula? Like take the
Mm-hmm.
pressure off. Or is it
Mm-hmm.
someone who needs like encouragement to be like, this is allowed to be a really important thing to you.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're allowed to hang on to it tight and hard because like other things were really out of your control. And this isn't in your control. And like, it can be hard externally to know what to say, which is the
Yeah.
right path.
Yeah. And I have this conversation with clients all the time
I
because
bet.
really
Yes.
it's not about like you should do A or you should do B.
Hmm.
It's hey, like tell me like what's important about this to you? Like, do you want to keep doing this? You don't
Or do you feel
know.
like
Okay,
you
like why? Like
should? Yes.
tell me more, right? Like what, and some people, I've had people say, like, no, this feels really important to me. It helps me feel connected to my baby when I'm not with them.
Yeah.
Even though I'm struggling with nursing, like I want to keep doing it. Or like, yes, like I love it. And people keep telling me like I can just do formula, but I don't want to, right? Like,
It's those
okay,
shoulds, right?
don't
Those
do
outside
it. Don't
expectations
do
on
it. Yeah.
both sides, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That can create guilt and can create problems. It can create feeling of judgments and us being really hard on ourselves. To wrap things up, I feel like we covered a lot, but any sort of thoughts on like coping with and supporting yourself, like as a mom, supporting yourself with when those mom guilt feelings come out? Anything we haven't touched on you want to kind of leave us with?
Yes, I think the thing I would leave with is having compassion for yourself.
Mhm.
Self-compassion is a huge cornerstone of the way that I practice. And because I think it is vitally important, like we are so hard on ourselves. We are so mean to ourselves. And so many of the people that I work with are high achieving and perfectionistic, and like there's no way to be a perfect mom. And we were all doing this for a long time, and a good chunk of us survived prior to the baby books and the parenting books and the TikToks and all of that. And that doesn't mean we don't listen to research and expert advice, but it also means that like this shit is hard. Being a parent is hard. Have some compassion for yourself. No one's doing it perfectly. I look to the work of Dr. Kristen Neff a lot.
I love her.
She has these. I love her. I recommend her book all the time. Her website is wonderful. She has these self-compassion exercises because it's like, you deserve care. This is hard. Please extend to yourself the grace that you would extend to your sister, your friend, your loved one, somebody that you really care about. Like, you would never talk to them this way. So don't talk to yourself this way. Tune in to what's important to you, to what matters to you, to your co-parent, to your partner in this situation, and to your baby, right? You have to parent the baby that you have.
Yes. I say that all the time.
The baby you have. You don't get to, my kids were so different. My kids are so different. You just parent the babies that you have. So that was a little bit longer than I really should have.
No, but I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm going to link to the self-compassion stuff in the show notes. And just to wrap us up, tell us where folks can find you.
Yeah. So I am a part of the practice of Dr. Emma Bash and Associates. People can find me on that website, which will be linked. I'm also on Instagram as the Parenting Psych, all one word, no spaces or anything. If people want to see some parenting content that has a lot to do with mom guilt being bullshit, and you can also on the website you can learn more, and on my Instagram you can learn more about the group that I'm going to be hosting again in January about mom guilt.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for such a great conversation today.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.